tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammāṃ Saṅghāṃ Namasāmi. Namatu Acharyasa. So it's been a few days since Ajahn Chah's, that was a commemoration of Ajahn Chah's birthday. It's an annual event in Thailand that commemorates his birthday, and then it's a time when the community gathers there, and the flowers are still fresh on Ajahn Chah's shrine, so it's still there. And of course just some memories, recollections keep coming through my mind, even though he passed away over 20 years ago. But still, I think the example that he left for us still is useful, valid, helpful. Oftentimes the image of Ajahn Chah as a kind of the kindly grandfather figure who wanders around the monastery with a kind of a walking stick, dispensing wise sayings and benevolent gestures. You know, it's kind of a popular image. Doesn't fit my memory of him. Yeah. I think we inevitably remake people into what we would like them to be, religious figures in particular. And it's not a bad thing, but it's good to reflect on what the more, say maybe a more complete spectrum would be. And certainly my own experience of living with him is that much of his teaching was on seemingly really mundane things, mundane, ordinary. Yeah, very much focused on the day-to-day things of how do you interact, how do you live a life of sense restraint and integrity. So much of it was about that. And I think that is really important because somehow we think that kind of like the wise nuggets of penetrating insight or wisdom were going to somehow change us. That we'll hear this little snippet of a gem of wisdom, and it's going to transform us. And I think the transformation of a human being really comes from our own willingness to stick with the practice, be patient with the practice, be willing to put up with ourselves and put up with other people. It's really so important to lay that foundation. Also, some of the things that Ajahn Chah emphasized over time were very much around. I don't know how many times I heard talks on, eat little, sleep little, speak little, practice a lot. Those were themes that he would go on, and you could almost say, "Oh God, another one of these talks." But of course, when he wasn't there, then you sort of think, gosh, I wish we would have a talk on it. Eat little, sleep little, talk little. You know, those were the sort of the fundamentals that really kind of created a kind of a strength or a resilience. Maybe a resilience is a good way to phrase it, because that's, in terms of spiritual practice and to really free the heart. There's this necessity of having a resilience within the mind, not in a kind of just keep your nose down and grind it out sort of thing, but a resilience in the sense of like a steadiness and a firmness of mind. And so much of the cultivation of mindfulness and meditation, it lays that foundation for the mind to be peaceful, or we're trying to lay the foundation of the mind to be peaceful. But I think it's helpful to reflect on where does that peace actually come from? Because it doesn't really come from, it's like some state of peace dropping out of somewhere and again, sort of being transformed. But it's more like the mind, the heart, becomes more and more clear and more steady, so that it isn't shaken by the sort of the internal moods and thoughts and feelings and the external stimulations or provocations. There's this, oh no, that's just the way it is, okay. And then that quality of peace that we experience is something that we can really carry into all of our activities of how we either be on our own, but as well as engage with others, engage with the world around us, and have a peaceful, solid center. And of course, that's one of the characteristics of when people talk of Ajahn. He was just somebody who was really peaceful and present and kind of unshakable in whatever circumstance he was in. He was really steady, and that's to me, that's something that is worthy of working towards and emulating and putting in the time and effort to try to allow that to arise within ourselves. How do we foster that? And in the practice, in the training in mindfulness, training in sense restraint, training in an integrity of action, training in meditation, training in investigation and discernment. There's always going to be obstacles come up. There's always obstacles, always difficulties. And it's important not to think that something's gone wrong with the practice if there's a difficulty. You don't go out and actively look for ways to make yourself miserable, but they inevitably, there's always going to be some difficulty, some obstacle, and to take an interest in it, and to use those opportunities for really learning and understanding. What's the mind doing with that? Am I making a meal of it and just creating a real problem out of this? Or is there ways that I can look at it and let it be there, let it pass away? How do I do that? And I remember Ajahn Chah using an image and saying about practice was, he said, sometimes it's kind of really painful and difficult, but at the same time it just can be really satisfying and joyful. And he said, he gave the image in the northeast of Thailand. There's kind of they like really spicy food, and there's a particular dish that Ajahn Chah liked, and it was leaves from the forest, and they're mixed with different things and spices, and it was really hot. And he said, yeah, sometimes practice is like eating this particular dish. You put it in your mouth, and all of it, bang! It's painful, and tears come to your eyes, and snot starts running, but it's so delicious. You you keep eating it. And so practice is like that sometimes, where it's this mix of sometimes it's just it's really difficult, sometimes, but it's really satisfying, and it's really so that sense of not shrinking back from some of the difficulties, and then realizing, well, actually there's an incredible amount of joy that comes when we put forth effort into something that's difficult, and we start to get insights and understanding of how does the mind work? How do we really rise above obstacles? It's not that the obstacles go away, but it's like there's an understanding, a way to hold it, that it isn't problematic anymore. It still might be difficult, but it's not problematic. So these are aspects of practice, where being able to take on these different flavors, and the way that there can be that mix of difficulty, but a lot of joy and satisfaction, and sometimes just trying to find the. I can remember that one time going to Los Angeles to listen. It was the first time I was early on when I came to America, and went to hear His Holiness the Dalai Lama teaching in L.A. He was teaching at UCLA, and it was a large sports kind of event, so many thousands of people. And he was teaching on emptiness, and it was many days of teaching, and something like the third day there was after His Holiness teaching and encouraging and giving kind of overall context of and the path for understanding of emptiness and experience of that. And there were some questions and answers, and the questions were submitted on pieces of paper. And somebody asked, what's the easiest, fastest way to realize emptiness? And His Holiness sort of read that, and he just was. You could hear the kind of gears going of just totally dumbstruck. How do I possibly answer this? And then he just went incredibly still. And then he put his head down on the seat, and you could hear the whole, several thousand people in this sports arena, and just everybody went incredibly quiet. And then after a few minutes, he lifted his head up, and he got a tissue. He'd been crying. He wiped his eyes, blew his nose, and then he just was really fierce and said, there is no easy, quick way. That is really terrible thinking. So it was really moving, actually. Somebody with the knowledge and compassion of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and to be, you just project, but you sort of think, well, if there really was an easy, quick way, he is the Bodhisattva of compassion, who's been reborn who knows how many times, bringing compassion into the world. And if there was an easy, quick way, I'm sure he'd tell us. But there isn't. You have to be willing to put the work in. to be patient with the practice. And that was something that certainly Ajahn Chah embodied, in the sense of that he was always willing to put forth the effort in the practice, and he was always willing to set the example, set the standard of doing it, and not in a some kind of sort of gung ho kind of macho way, but it's sort of like we really need to be able to stretch what we think our capacity is, because we usually think our capacity is a lot less than what we really are capable of doing, both in terms of goodness and peacefulness and understanding. We tend to sell ourselves short. So to have that sense of learning how to encourage ourselves. And part of practice is really just picking up, again, sort of ordinary themes, but really investigating them. The themes of one of the things that the Buddha has encourages us to investigate on a daily basis of I am of the nature to age, I've not gone beyond aging. I am of the nature to sicken, I've not gone beyond sickness. I am of the nature to die, I've not gone beyond dying. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. I am the owner of my kamma, heir to my kamma, born of my kamma, related to my kamma, abide supported by my kamma. Whatever I shall do, for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir. These 5 themes for frequent recollection they're not hugely popular in our culture. But from a Buddhist perspective, these are the things that really help to turn our attention and turn our minds to relinquishment. And relinquishment isn't just pushing away the things we don't like, or giving up the things that are a bit messy, but really learning how to let go of and put down, and not to pick up, just our likes and our dislikes, our wantings, our desires and our aversions, our reactivity that we have to ourselves and the world around us. The idiom is sort of letting go, but a lot of it is just learning how to not pick it up and seeing it for what it is. When Ajahn Chah was a monk practicing in the forest, he spent many years wandering, practicing, seeking, meditating. Yeah. And he was staying in one little monastery hermitage. He was on his own, and it was an old monastery. There was a hut there that he was living in, and the hut had a porch in the front. He would sit meditation on that on a regular basis. And one day this crow flew up to him and had some grass in its mouth, and it flew up to him. And Ajahn Chah was sitting meditation. This crow comes and places this grass in front of Ajahn Chah, and it was like 3 strands of grass. And then he flew up, and he sort of, caw, caw, caw. It makes its crow sounds, and then it flies off. And Ajahn, that's strange. And he didn't really think too much of it. He said, other than, that's kind of strange. And then 3 days later, a child died in the village, and they brought the body to the monastery to do a funeral ceremony. And then, I can't remember how much longer after, not very long after that, same thing, this Ajahn Chah sitting, he sat regularly in the front, but then this crow comes again and lands right in front on the porch, puts some grass in front. And then shortly after that, there's another child in the family. And this happened 3 times. And each time, of course, it was this poor family was the children were 3. I can't remember. I'm not sure how many children they had, but this and just the grief. He was watching just the grief of the family, and just the kind of the difficulty of the human condition. And it was really powerful for him. It was an incredible motivation, both in that sense of, I'm of the nature to age. I'm not going to be this is my condition as well. But then the grief of that separation from the loved, and the kind of difficulty of the human condition. And it brought up a very strong motivation of, I really need to practice for freedom, for liberation, for peace. That was a very powerful motivation, and then that sense of the kind of the mystery of it all, and how do we know? How can you know what the heck's going to happen in this human condition? And when we don't even know, and this crow seems to know, where does this come from? So there's this mystery, and then this motivation. In the scriptures, there's a word for that. That kind of motivate, nipita, which is there's kind of like a sadness to the reality of the world, and there's a disenchantment, but there's a motivation and an inspiration, and it's hard to put it into language because there is this kind of disenchantment and sadness, but the actual quality of the mind is bright and wholesome, because it's sort of there's this very pure motivation to how to be free, how to be peaceful within this whole ball of wax thing. So that was a circumstance in Ajahn Chah's life that I think is sticks with me. And one of the things Ajahn Chah, remember him saying, that Nibbana lies on the shores of death, and in that sense of again coming back to that sense, that theme of we have to take this human condition really seriously, and you have to sort of be willing to put forth effort, and it isn't for us to really relinquish and let go, and to be really peaceful with the whole human condition. It pushes us to not shrink away from. It's like today. Of course, there's a shrine to Ajahn Chah, and next is a shrine to today at the meal offering. There's the main was Debbie's mother passed away 2 years ago today, but then all sorts of other people have my father died around this time, my mother died, so died, and it's sort of that recollection of commemorating about 8 or 9 deaths and 2 births. So, it's birth and death. This is where it, birthdays and birthdays have only one way to go. so sort of bringing it to mind and reminding ourselves that that's the case, but not as a sort of thing of, isn't that terrible? Isn't that a shame? It's more like, this is part of the human condition. And like today at the mealtime, it's just it was a cause for generosity and recollection of the good, and people had I think by all reports had a lot of fun this morning, making the meal and doing the meal offering and just enjoying themselves with that collective effort to do something good, and it's something we can delight in. So that these recollections aren't, and the examples of the the teachers aren't for just trying to make people miserable, because it's that ability to really look at things clearly that allows the mind to be really experience its strength, its inner resources. So maybe one last story I think of Ajahn Chah around that scene, where he was living out in the forest and practicing diligently, but then he got ill, probably malaria. That was the most common illness if you're living in the forest. But he was really ill, really sick, and to a point where he started saying, "Wow, am I going to make it through? I don't know." He's on his own, practicing in the forest, and then he started kind of worrying. Well, gosh, if I die here, then all monks in Thailand have you have a like an identification booklet, your ordination. It's a record of your ordination and what monastery you're registered at, where your preceptor is, or where your teachers are. So then you carry that around if you go places, and people know that you're a properly ordained monk. And so anyway, he started to sort of think, well, if I die here, and some hunter comes along or some villager and finds my identity card, this word's going to get back to my family, my mother, and it's going to be a cause of sadness for her that maybe he died on his own out in the forest. And everybody, what I'll do is I'll burn my identity card. And with that, then he sort of pulled it out and he's getting ready, and he was gonna burn his identity. He's kind of lying there, and then he heard the sound of a barking deer, which are very common in the forest in Thailand. And that got his mind sort of thinking, barking deer, they live out in the forest. They don't have doctors. They don't, they seem to get by okay. Why am I so worried? And that started this chain of thought of if the barking deer can be out in the forest on their own, and they get by without doctors and hospitals, they gotta get sick as well, and most of them seem to get better. So you say, so it just sort of brought up this sense of energy again, and And it brought up his motivation to. So he sort of pulled himself up and starting sitting meditation again, and that was it was just it turned a corner, and it really gave him confidence in, that there's this kind of healing power of the Dhamma and the practice, that yes, we're going to experience illness, yes, we're going to experience difficulties, but when we keep turning to the Dhamma and keep turning to truth, keep turning to our efforts to train ourselves, then we've got a refuge that we can rely on. And that then his mind sort of got very bright and joyous over that time. And obviously he did survive. And ended up establishing his monastery and being able to teach many of us, so that his teachings get passed on to today. So these are some reflections. It's close to Ajahn Chah's Memorial Day, so offer that.